Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm going to share this little slideshow, just so I know what my meeting announcements are. Thank you. All right, thank you, Jeremy, for joining us today. So thanks for joining us, Jeremy. I know you're busy.
No, I appreciate it, and glad the timing worked out where I could join you guys live. This is way more fun than YouTube.
Well, our next meeting will be next month on a Friday up at Lookout Mountain. So you guys can't, unless you want to come to town. But it's our annual picnic, famous days, we'll be catering. And we got some good, couple of microphones, share microphones that we're gonna give away. And then the usual swag, so if your business, you have swag and you want to bring it, feel free, we can just give it away, it'll be great. So for you guys in the room, every meeting that you attend in person, which you're in the room, so you're in person, you have to do 2 meetings. But after that, I will enter you in per meeting into a drawing in November. And somebody will get a SBE plus membership on us. And then, yeah, so as I mentioned, the picnic, register. Please register. You have until the 12th to register for that. And then thank you to our sustaining members. We have quite a few of them. They're the reason that the picnic is not going to cost you anything. All right, with that, I should be able to make user the code. Make post. Yes. All right, with that, I'll give it to you, Jeremy.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. It's almost lunchtime. That's pretty cool. I'm going to try to share the right screen here, so hopefully this will work. Everybody can see that okay?
See you.
Good, good. All right.
Yeah, we don't see anything else.
Okay, good.
No, I mean, we just see you.
Oh, you don't see. It didn't work. Oh, lovely. Let's see. Maybe it didn't. How about that? That looks like it's saying share. Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks. We at EMF, we were a Teams house, so I'm still newbie on Zoom, but glad it's working. So yeah, thanks Amanda and Chris and everybody for inviting me out today. I appreciate it. My name's Jeremy Preece. I worked at K-Love for a number of years, 2023 to be exact, and due to the move to Tennessee, I ended up exiting last month and started my own little engineering business, contract work, things like that. So I'm independent now, but a lot of what I've learned over the past 2 decades at K-Love and Air One EMF is really very helpful to stations of all sizes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about standardization. So if you have 2 signals or 1200, it really doesn't matter how you apply some of these techniques. And I don't think this will be new to anybody who's been doing engineering for a little while. We've all been talking about this, virtualization, audio over IP, good practices, things like that. So I'm just going to kind of walk through it. I love interactivity. So even though I can't quite see everybody's hands from this screen, feel free to just speak up and say something, disagree, throw tomatoes. They won't hit me anyway. It's all good. So standardization in the broadcast facility, and I'm going to give away. I'm not going to do the PowerPoint that has the the fade in every time I make a point or anything. You guys can read and follow along as you like. But what that meant to us when I was at EMF was the cookie cutter concept, and again, if you have just a couple signals and you've got the authority to do so, you can add a cookie cutter concept to basically a network of any size. And it's the way the cell industry does things. Verizon techs and AT&T techs are trained to work on basically any of their systems. EMF used that model from a long time ago, where every rack was kind of configured the same. There's always variances, of course, per site. That's normal. But every site can be worked on by every trained technician or engineer. When I started back in 2001, it was interesting because we didn't have a lot of resources. And as we would try to scrounge stuff up to build stations. We kind of used whatever we had. And I remember one of the racks I built had all purple wire. Why we even had purple Belden wire was new to me, but we had it. And so left, right, control, didn't matter. It was purple because that's what we had in the shop. And after a while, we realized this is not really practical. This is not going to be sustainable. So we started moving toward this model of uh, can we build a cookie cutter rack and deploy that every single time? And it worked really well. One of the things that we were really trying to aim for was when I started, if you built a station in Albany, even if you were in California, you owned that station forever. And that also wasn't very practical. So by using this method, you can reduce workload, you can reduce a ton of documentation because a lot of it is able to be shared across sites. It makes training a lot easier and it reduces confusion, which is great. And then it helps you get back on the air faster because you don't have to think about stuff so much when you're in the heat of the moment or it's 2 a.m. and you don't remember everything. It's more familiar that way. So the cookie cutter concept works with a lot of different devices that are common. Transmitters are one thing that are difficult. Every site might have a different transmitter because of some other need, and that's normal. We use Nautel, Gates Air, Crown, you name it, we probably have it in the field. But for remote control and monitoring, we decided to forklift upgrade the entire network several times to have a standard across the board so that all the remote controls were the same. RDS encoders, that's a big one too. It makes it a lot easier if you've got a lot of sites you're pushing RDS data to. EAS also, if you're doing remote monitoring, you don't want to have to mix and match those. Even UPSs, because if you're doing if you're writing scripts in your remote control that fire off stuff to SNMP, if the NIC is going to be controlled the same way, you don't have to rewrite scripts for every single UPS. You write one and you copy and paste it into the remote control. Network switches and firewalls, especially managed switches, makes it a lot easier to fleet manage that stuff. If the PD will let you audio processing, we often were driven by PD requests, and then we kind of worked within those. But again, it just helps it makes it's familiar. So if you guys have used Orban products, every single model and every firmware has a different piece of software, which is a headache. But if you standardized with the 8600S, you only need one piece of software that you keep all of them up to date. So things like that. It's kind of thinking more in a global scale when you're building out sites. So if you don't have a lot of control over the equipment, you still do have a lot of control inside the rack with the way you do things. Using the IP schemas that are the same across sites is a huge benefit when you have a lot of stations to take care of. If you know that all of your remote controls are at the .10 octet on your network, you don't have to think about it anymore. It's if you know that the index is going to be at .20 and the UPS is at .2 or whatever, every single site's laid out that way. You start to go, hey, I don't have to look stuff up. All I have to know is the first half of the IP address for that site. And I always would joke with folks like, I know IP addresses better than birthdays because I ended up using them so much. I always go, oh, that's 10.205. Whatever. And I didn't have to look up the last octet. So something to think about there. Also, colors. This is pretty basic stuff, but if you're running a new network for AOIP, use different colors, especially in the rack. And really when you're using managed switches, because you want to make sure that the ports are being assigned to the right place. If you use yellow for AOIP and the business LAN is blue or whatever, it makes it a lot more easy to follow visually and know that cables are plugged into the right place and you're not sending live wire data over your business LAN or something. Another one too on your remote controls. We found this to be very helpful, especially before we had a network operations center answering the calls. When I started at EMF, all the remote controls called the on-call engineer. And as we had a couple hundred sites, that got pretty busy some days. Knowing that contact one A was always transmitter on was really helpful. I didn't have to have a book for every single site. Uh, Things like that go a long way in just making your life a lot easier when you're managing a fleet. Standard wiring layout, colors, naming conventions. A big fan of printed labels. Brother makes a couple of really nice label printers you can use to make uh, gorgeous wire labels. And for a couple $100, if you're rewiring your whole site, it's well worth the investment. The other thing too to consider on this is setting up equipment in the same physical locations as best you can. If you start with a signal flow from the top to the bottom, like maybe your STL or satellite dish, and kind of work your way down to the transmitter, or vice versa, whatever works, whatever makes sense to you. If you do that at every site, it also becomes very familiar. The wire lengths are all basically the same. You expect the cables to be terminated in the same location in the rack. And the nice thing is, if you're walking some newbie through, or an IT guy or something who hasn't been there, you can say, hey, it's the blue box about chest height. Oh, I see that. Okay, now go around the back. And it really does help, especially if you're on vacation walking others through who might not fully understand how the rack works. And the last one on this note here is to clearly document your standards and to make others aware of them. If you don't tell people you've got a standard and someone comes in after you, they're going to change everything, not realizing that there was some thought behind that. A couple more benefits here. Muscle memory. If you operate your sites as close to each other as you possibly can, it's a lot less for you to keep in your mind. It's less documentation to carry around in binders, paper or electronic. It's easier to troubleshoot, especially from afar. I always appreciated that in most cases, I could, but barring an absolute failure, I could restore stations from my computer as long as I was on the network. And that's a huge benefit. And the technology we've got these days really makes that quite practical. As I mentioned with even the Orban software, using the same hardware across your sites reduces the number of software, packages you have to keep on your computer and keep them up to date, firmware updates and all that stuff. IP addressing is a lot easier to manage. What I would suggest if you are going to go this route is to create a spreadsheet and label every octet, what that device does, and basically make that your standard. And if you need to document that in a binder at the tower site or wherever, so that it's not a surprise. So when you go, hey, I added a tower light controller now that has IP, where did I assign that? Things like that. Try to think ahead. Another big win here, Rob Peters backup to pay Paul's main. That's a huge benefit. Especially if an aux site and your main goes down and you have all the same stuff, you can run over to, the other site's aux, steal it to get your main back on or something like that. And it's also easier to stock spares that work across your whole fleet. You don't have to worry about, oh man, gosh, I have an FMB 80 there, and now I got to put in a 732. I got to change up everything. If everything's consistent, you can drag and drop stuff and be back, get your services back on in no time. Bulk discounts, a huge benefit. If you're doing a big upgrade of a bunch of stations, ask for those discounts. Vendors and dealers are often very flexible. Maybe they'll even give you free shipping. You just ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. And it also builds deeper relationships with certain vendors too. I've had the opportunity to leverage those relationships many times and be able to get stuff maybe a little bit ahead of others just because we bought more from them and they appreciated that. And kind of last note, fleet management is always better if you actually have a fleet. So even if your fleet is a bunch of different stations, you might still be able to employ some of these standardizations into different racks, depending on, again, how much authority you have. And I know in contracting, you might not have quite as much, but if you are building a station for someone, you might be able to implement these and basically give them a document that says, here's why I did this. Here's how it works. Blue is this, yellow is that, these things. And I think most folks would appreciate that. And again, if you guys have questions or thoughts, please interrupt anytime. All right, technology. We're all nerds, I think. At least I am. And I have been very encouraged to see the advances in technology for broadcast over the past decade. It's come a long way. I remember, 2010, maybe before that, walking the show floor, trying to encourage manufacturers to about think outside the box a little bit. And they're finally really starting to do that. I mean, years ago, nobody spoke SNMP. It was difficult to get a LAN connection on the back of a device. And now pretty much everything connects to the internet for the most part. And that allows incredible remote monitoring capabilities. And that also gives engineers the ability to manage a lot more sites practically. I hated not knowing what was wrong driving to a site. And now, with pretty much everything plugged into the internet, you can go, okay, that's the one device that seems to be where the audio is stopping. I can bring that device with me and not have to make two trips. So with that, try to connect everything you possibly can that has the ability to, to the internet. I think that's really helpful. Use SNMP to send and receive data to your remote control or an SNMP concentrator of some kind. That's SNMP is great. It's very low bandwidth. You can do a ton of stuff through that. You can almost even at EMF, we would mimic the devices in our remote control. So there'd be a page for the mod monitor. It would pull out PS, RT, all the settings would be visible on the remote control page. So you didn't have to log into the GUI separately and you could just go across the tabs. There's lots of stuff you can do with SNMP. It's very powerful. It can be a little confusing sometimes to get it fired up. I still have a hard time using the iReasoning mid browser. I'm like, this thing never works the way I expect it to, but once you get it going, it's fantastic. If you have the ability to put cameras in, sometimes that's nice to be able to look at the site before you go. It also is good for vandalism and stuff to a degree. I know a lot of criminals don't really care if they're being recorded anymore, but it's nice to say, "Oh man, the door's open." I mean, I'm sure many of you have gone to sites where the door was open or something, and maybe the wind blew it open, or someone didn't lock it last time or didn't close it. And then log everything. Data is cheap these days. Hard drive space is cheap. The internet is fast if you've got internet at your site. And specifically look at things and watch trending. And that will help you get it before it gets you. A lot of devices will give you indicators they're on their way out. You'll start to see errors or it'll be rebooting randomly. If you've got air conditioner problems, you can start to see that it has a harder and harder time keeping up with the heat load, things like that. If you watch that stuff and set your alarm points properly, it'll really buy you a lot of happier evenings, at least as I've seen. Some of the new tech too in audio is great. AOIP significantly reduces the wiring load that we used to be dealing with, running uh, multi-conductor cable all over studios. It's a thing of the past now. Miles of cable have been reduced to a few Cat 6 runs, which is fantastic. And we'll talk a little bit about virtualization too, as that also simplifies things in many ways and also, reduces wiring, reduces headaches, reduces documentation. And some of this tech also allows us to employ the good standardization practices we've been talking about by building templates, uh, deploying to mass sites from a laptop. That's really nice to be able to do all this stuff from your desk. Who wants to drive to a tower site if you don't have to, right? And so I recommend, because of the advances in technology, don't purchase hardware for racks that doesn't have some form of remote connectivity. I've really encouraged the vendors and manufacturers I've worked with to to get away from contact closures even. I want to be able to see, I want to be able to read what's happening, and I want to be able to log it in a useful way for later. It allows at K-Love, it allowed 40 engineers to care for 1,000 radio stations because those devices were sending data to a place that could capture this and tell us what was going on. And then kind of back to audio, the old 950 STLs work great, fantastic, but there's great stuff on top of that too. I would say layer them. If you've got a 950, consider an IP STL of some kind as even a backup. It's a really good fail safe in case you lose an amplifier or something like that. The wireless gig links are great. We've deployed those, and personally, I would steer away from the Amazon specials. The nano bridges and stuff are fine for monitor and control, but they do fail. And I would not want my primary audio running over an unlicensed gig link. It's risky, and we've seen those just fail or they get interference from something. And you don't want to, maybe for backup or a tertiary, that's fine. And then the satellite IP stuff, if you're working with a big satellite group, VSAT might be a good option. It doesn't make a lot of sense for, probably less than 100 sites, I would say. But Starlink's kind of interesting. I've done some testing with that, and it works quite well. There's real disadvantages to it in some business use cases. As far as the last time I checked, you couldn't get a corporate billing account. Maybe that will change. Getting static IPs was very difficult. So you have to kind of think about that from the infrastructure and IT perspective, and then billing. Hey, I'm going to put this on my credit card every month. How's the boss going to feel about that? But Starlink is a great way to get internet to pretty much any location that you can see the sky. And we did some audio tests over it. It actually worked quite well. There are dropout points during the day, so you have to consider that the uptime we measured for audio delivery was about 3 nines, maybe 2.5. So you have to consider that. However, again, thinking backup, it's fantastic. Monitor control, also great. Cellular modems are another option. I know some networks are delivering audio over cellular. Yeah, I've had limited success in trials with that, but hey, if it works, it's a good option. So now on to virtualization. If you guys were at NAB, you probably saw that's the talk of the town. It seemed everybody and their brothers talking virtualization. And I've had a lot of conversations with engineers over it. I know it's scary, but it's really just a computer running some software. You're on a computer right now running software. So the other thing is most of the devices in the rack are computers running some form of software. So it's not nearly as scary as it sounds. And I think a lot of folks go, oh, I have to run it on Amazon, or I'm going to run it in Azure, and then I don't own it. You can run bare metal servers at your own facility and run basically a virtualized platform on your own systems. And that's also, there's wins to both. You might want to consider running stuff in Amazon if you're trying to collect a lot of data from different sites and push them there. If you're doing virtualized audio, I would recommend keeping it on premises. Running audio through other servers, you lose a little bit of control, where if you have a virtualized system in the house, you get to own it. The nice thing about virtualization too is it reduces the number of rack devices in the equipment rack, and it can be duplicated almost instantly. If you build a good ISO file with the OS and everything loaded on it, and that hard drive fails, I mean, you're literally sticking a USB stick in the thing and booting up to a new drive, and you're on the air. If you can afford 2 servers, run them in parallel, run them hot, so they're both getting all the stuff at the same time, and you have no downtime. You could build switching in your remote control to switch to the other air chain almost instantly, and the listeners would almost not know. The other great thing about virtualized stuff is you're starting to put all this stuff into a computer anyway. So remote monitoring and configuration is fantastic. You're doing everything from one desktop, which is a huge blessing. However, the broadcast tech stack has quite a ways to go before we're really virtualizing everything. There's only a few devices that I can say are practically virtualized today. Automation systems are basically there. You might have to deal with some sound cards and things like that, but for the most part, automation is all computer anyway, so that's kind of a given. Remote controls are getting there. Automat is, I believe they're selling it. They've been talking about it for a long time, but the virtual script easy is really quite cool. If you guys have ever used the Worldcast or what it was called, Relio, I know that didn't take off great. iHeart used it for a few years, then it kind of went back to Burke. But Script Easy is a phenomenally powerful remote control software, and it would run on a PC basically that was just wrapped in a in a single RU box that, made it look like a remote control, but it's just a computer running software. So they're looking at licensing that. If you need GPI, GPO, no problem. Davicom makes a device called the Axum, and it's about the size of a cell phone, give or take. And you can put ins and outs and sample voltages. They have a couple different models. They're a few $100s. They can tie in with SNMP, a great way to add things because most new transmitters don't need a lot of closures. Some are coming with almost no remote control metering at all. It's all expected to be done through a GUI or SNMP. Audio processing is coming a long way. The Omnia Forza, there was a lot of talk about that. I got to play with that a little bit at NAB. It's pretty nice. And then Thimio's stereo tool has been around for years. It's extremely stable, doesn't use a lot of software. It doesn't use a lot of hardware processing time or anything like that. I mean, I ran it on a laptop for streaming for years, and it was fantastic. And yes, you can push MPX out now. If you can literally have your computer spit MPX out, it's that easy. RDS is incorporated into a lot of these audio processing platforms, so that's cool. And then the HD importer and exporter, it's interesting. Radio World just posted something yesterday about this, or maybe it was on LinkedIn, but at the show, I spent some time with the guys over at Xperi and was kind of nudging them. Hey, can we get that Gen 4 software as a standalone package that I can run on my own computer? And they're getting there. And the nice thing about that is if you have a virtualized platform where you've got your automation system speaking AOIP to your processor, virtualized RDS, virtualized importer exporter stuff, you've reduced your rack stuff down to a couple devices, and that's pretty cool. And again, if you have two servers, you can be running them in tandem, and your uptime is going to be incredible. And if one thing, one instance fails, you just restart it. I'll give away a little trade secret. We were running virtualized stuff at our station in Pago Pago, American Samoa. And at first I was like, this is crazy. This thing's so far away. Why on earth would we put it there? It was pretty nice to be able to log in and actually manage virtual devices through a remote desktop. I mean, I tell you, it was saved 2 days of travel to get out there, to literally go out there and go, I just need to do this. We didn't have a computer failure or anything like that, thankfully. So there are some considerations. The environment, you want to buy a good server that's not going to, you don't want to buy a desktop that's meant to be sitting in a nice office. You got to think about, hey, is it going to have enough cooling, RF sensitivity? You don't want to buy something that's in a plastic box or anything. There's some considerations when you get there. And if you can run it at your studio, even better. But if it's going to go at the tower site, you got to think a little bit more like, all right, what's this thing? Is this a broadcast appliance quality device that I'm running all this on? Or am I going to be regretting this in 6 months? Down the road, virtual EAS and virtual index. I'm really hoping the FCC will grant that. That's a huge piece for the virtual air chain, because right now, unless you're running Dante, where you can take out the audio from AOIP into a dongle and then put it back, if you're doing live wire, it's challenging to do index because they're AES3 or analog. That's just the fact of life. But part 11 kind of requires that we have a box. So hopefully the FCC will update that and allow virtualized EAS. Virtual EAS audio receivers, that's a piece of cake with SDRs. You could buy 3 or 4 SDRs on Amazon for nothing and run that into a VM, easy peasy to get audio. Virtual modulation and off-air monitors. I would be lying if I said I hadn't been probing a couple of vendors saying, hey guys, this would be a really nice software package. We would love to have this. Throw in an SDR, and you're selling an SDR and a USB dongle instead of this box. This is going to be really helpful. And then the other thing that's been kind of, everybody's talking AI, which I find pretty funny because AI is actually kind of stupid. It's still learning off of things that everyone else has shared with it. It doesn't really learn things. Where I see remote controls going is machine learning, and that's the same type of tech that they use for credit card fraud stuff. So if you went to Florida and bought gas, and then 10 minutes later you bought gas in Kentucky, the systems go, hey, that's not right. Something's wrong. It's not a human that makes that decision. It's a machine. So as we think about remote controls, machine learning has a lot of advantages for broadcasters. If you can get some parameters in there on what it should be, eventually the system will go, hey, this isn't right. Something's different than it was before. A great example. So let's say you had maybe some water in your line or something. And so certain times of the day at certain temperatures, that water was actually condensing and causing the viswar to go up, and then it would warm up and it, evaporate and go back up and they went away. You might not notice that until you have a shutback or something like that on your transmitter. Well, the machine learning could be like, hey, every day at the same time I see my viswar bump, I probably should let somebody know about that. There's a long way to go in that. I know there are a couple of remote control manufacturers who are thinking along those lines. They're calling it artificial intelligence, which is fine, whatever they want to call it. But watching your sites for you as though it was a person is really helpful, and it gives you, hopefully you can get a warning that says, hey, just FYI, every day at 11 o'clock, your Viswar is higher than it was yesterday, and it's going up every day. Maybe that will save you from going off the air. All right, keeping it simple. I think this kind of goes into the good practices, especially as we have all this modern tech. But a simple air chain is a reliable air chain. And I have witnessed this many, many, many times over my career. If you overcomplicate things, it makes your life hard. So by using modern tech, even though it sounds complicated, a lot of it actually reduces what needs to be in the actual air chain. And you can get you can get a device that can do multiple tasks now. So like a VM, you could do processing, RDS, a fail-safe audio playout, all that on one device, where before you might have to have a whole stack of things. And I know, especially in the 80s and stuff, we were stacking processors and all kinds of stuff. We don't really need to do that so much anymore. And each one of those, when they failed, would take you off the air. So we want to try to put only what's absolutely necessary in the air chain. And I always say the fewer devices that can take you off the air, the better. And it's just one of those good practices. And it depends on the situation, the complexity of the station, how much is going on, but really don't put things in there that are not truly necessary to keep you on the air. And then keeping wires tidy, that's kind of a given, but well labeled too. It's so frustrating working in Iraq where there's wires everywhere and not a single label on anything, because you really can't figure out how stuff works unless you take all the zip ties off and then tray stuff. And it makes it easier to understand at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're blurry eyed and, barely awake. Kind of speaking of zip ties too, I've become a big fan of the Velcro straps. Those things are amazing. You're supposed to use them for network cables anyway. So why not use them throughout your whole rack? Because then when you're actually having to change a wire out or add a wire, you don't have to cut those things. They don't slice your hand when you reach in because you didn't nib off the top of the thing very well. Uh, and I tell you what, they're some places are cheaper than zip ties. I've gotten a 100 pack on Amazon for $5. So I strongly recommend using Velcro ties wherever you possibly can. It just makes everything so much easier. And kissing the backup, we want to keep our backup systems simple and practical as well. Don't overcomplicate redundancy. I had this one site when I worked at EMF where I was like, I'm going to make it impossible to take this sucker off. Like, it's never going to break. That was the most unreliable site I ever had. And it was because I had all these interconnected redundancies, and it came where I couldn't actually remember which device was on the air feeding which part of the chain. I had so many crossing connections. So all that had to get ripped out, and I went back to A and B chains, and it got a whole lot more reliable. And then when you're building redundancy too, this was a conversation I had to have a lot of with our field engineers. You know, RF on is important. And if you think about it, 50% is only 3 dB down. And as you're driving around, your car signal is varying by 10 or more dB in a lot of cases if you're getting multipath and stuff. And most listeners don't even know. So even at 50%, you're covering your coverage so well that most listeners are not going to notice. So if you can figure out a way to get a 50% backup or even 25%, that's better than nothing. And just go, hey, what do I really need? I need RF. I need audio. And I put something is better than nothing. That could be a cellular modem backup with a, a 56K audio stream, whatever is better than nothing. And then the other one you want is basic positive and control and remote switching capabilities for your backup. If you can't switch it on remotely, it's not super helpful, especially if there's a snowstorm or you're out of town or something. Antenna switches are not terribly expensive. And if you can switch between a main and a backup transmitter, even, I swear, even if it's an exciter, I'm not proud of it, but there was one time I had a McMartin transmitter. It, it blew up, shock. And so I took the exciter, and I didn't have any interconnects with me or anything. So I soldered RG58 to the bullet and I shoved it in the coax and I cranked it up. And honestly, that thing covered the whole stinking town. I couldn't believe it. But, if I had had an antenna switch, even with a 50-watt backup, I wouldn't have had to be there for hours trying to figure out how to get something back on the air for the listeners. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying a second ago. Minimize shared components between your main and your backup. It's real easy to forget that one UPS running your main and aux rack is bad because when the UPS fails, and it will, then you've lost both. So really try to isolate those A and B chains as much as possible. Um, don't use your aux as a feed point for your main or something like that if you can avoid it, or have a backup to the backup or something so that there's still some way to get audio there if the chain in the middle got broken. Put alarming on the backup systems too to make sure they're ready to go. There's times when, gosh, I didn't know the UPS failed at the aux, and now I'm stuck with a dead main, and I can't talk to the aux. That's no fun. Uh, there's this saying I've heard, and I think it's very true. One is none, and two is one. So having a backup of some kind for all on-air critical devices is really important. And anything is better than nothing. Even the old Optimod 2200 or whatever you've got laying around, it's better than nothing to get you back on the air. And most of the time, listeners really don't even notice that much. I've always been amazed. They don't even notice these things. All right, kind of closing out because I want to make sure I keep us on time here. My mentor into engineering told me this, and I thought it was the funniest thing, but it's so true. A clean transmitter is a happy transmitter. Modern broadcast equipment, because a lot of it is running computers, likes to be clean and cool. We want to change and clean those air filters on equipment, especially the computers running at tower sites. And don't forget, your Nautel GV or NV is a computer. It's got a computer inside, so make sure it stays cool and clean. Don't forget those air conditioner filters and coils. And I would even say, even as a tenant at a tower site, if you notice the air conditioner is not being serviced, $20 for the air filters is going to save you time. And if you go outside with a garden sprayer and wash off the coils because it hasn't been cleaned in 2 years, that's a win for you and the other tenants. If the landlord's just kind of like, whatever, just maybe take care of it yourself. It's a small investment in your station that you're being tasked to care for. Monitor room and stack temps, and again, watch trending on those. Use pest traps. Man, I've seen more critters at tower sites than I ever want to even remember. And seal those door frames and entry points for bugs and dirt and everything else, especially if you have a closed system. It doesn't do much good if it's sucking in outside air. We don't have this problem, thankfully, in the West Coast too much, but keeping weeds and grass away from the building. Back east, man, those things can be as tall as the roof, and you can't even find the building. But they grow around AC units, clog up the AC, and then the thing can't breathe, and one thing leads to another. Guy points too. It's good practice to make sure those guy points can be easily inspected and watched, and you don't have manzanita growing through the guy anchors or anything like that. So keeping all that stuff away and just kind of on a routine maintenance, taking a weed whacker out there every couple months and cleaning things up. And then the other thing is kind of obvious, but I've laughed at how many times I've been to sites or others have been to sites, and I'll ask, so did you notice the coax or did you notice the antenna? No, I didn't look up. So when you're driving to the site, just look up. Hey, does everything still look like it's supposed to be there? Maybe it's a tenant's coax that's blowing in the wind. Well, that can do a lot of damage to your stuff too. We've lost translator antennas and everything else because someone's 3 and 1/8 inch cable was whacking into our log periodic, and down she went eventually. So just look up. It's just a good practice when you're driving to tower sites. I know this might be a sore point for a lot of us. It was for me for many years, but it's not job security to be the only one who knows how everything works. So write it down. Keep good documentation and records of how things work. Sketch it out in Visio, PowerPoint, Lucid, whatever you've got. It's really helpful to have that stuff and make sure that people understand the basics of what's going on. Again, if you're bringing in an outside contractor because you're going to go on vacation or a cruise, you want them to be able to, because it's going to break. It always breaks when you're gone. At least that way they have some idea of like, what in the world did he do here? And the other thing too is standardization requires good record keeping and documentation. I think it's really important that uh, you document your standards in a way that others can understand them so they don't change them inadvertently even. Um, Tell others where your documentation is. Hey, this is where I keep my IP address scheme. This is where I keep passwords if you're going to do things like that. And train someone to be a backup. I think, as I've said a few times, it's way more fun to be able to unplug and know your sites are taken care of by somebody and that you're not on the hook if you're far away. And good practices extend now to the network. Years ago, automation never touched the internet, but now we've got DJs literally surfing the internet on automation machines and stuff. And it's like, ah, but make sure you lock the front door, use good information security protocols in how you implement these devices. Don't write down passwords or stick them on sticky notes on the front of the box. That's generally not very secure. Admin's a terrible password. I see it used all the time. And keep copies of that important information in a safe place. If the GM has a folder or a locked file cabinet or something, make copies of all your documentation, give them to him and say, hey, I need you to keep these secure because there's sensitive information in here. But that one is none. If you have everything in a paper binder and you lose it, oh man, that's rough, right? I would highly recommend using a password manager or an encrypted file system that someone else has access to. That's where you keep the password in a locked location. Password managers are awesome because you can just from a web browser click, 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 and every site can have a totally different password, and you don't have to know what it is. Makes it a lot easier. Change those default usernames and passwords. I'm glad that some equipment's now forcing that. I think that's a good thing. And if you can, try to avoid using the same passwords for the same devices at every site. Uh, I would recommend using a system that makes sense. So you could incorporate the call sign or the frequency or the site address or something into the password that's still logical, that you can still remember at 2 o'clock in the morning if you don't have a password manager. And it's going to be a lot harder for someone to just randomly guess, especially if they don't have access to multiple sites. We want to lock the back door too. This is a huge one. Don't ever, ever, ever put a broadcast device unprotected on the internet. And by what I mean is taking the modem straight into an RDS encoder or your remote control. If you don't put a firewall, you will get hacked. And I've seen it, I've witnessed it, I've read about it. And someone can get into your network from there very easily and do significant damage. We've seen automation systems, billing systems compromised, all kinds of stuff. So don't be that guy. We want to lock our doors. And if someone does get in, it's because someone wasn't being careful in email and clicked a link, and not that we left a big hole in our firewall or network rather. But use firewalls no matter what, even if it's a off the shelf something or other at the tower site, a D-Link or a Netgear, it doesn't matter. Anything's better than nothing. I would also not recommend using port forwarding unless you really have to. A lot of modern routers, inexpensive ones, $100, give you VPN access. It's best if you can put it on the corporate VPN if you've got a fleet and everything ties together there. But if you don't, that's okay. If you've got internet and you can get a VPN, the great thing is that way you log in through your phone or your laptop to the VPN at the site. You got access to everything, but it's secure. And it makes it a lot easier than having to open ports because sometimes they want to share ports. HTTP is always 80 or, it makes it so much easier to figure stuff out. But if you do have to use port forwarding, make sure you change the default ports, especially SSH. Years ago, I was playing around with the Raspberry Pi. I put it on I mean, it was locked down, but I put the SSH port forwarded to its SSH port default. And within an hour, I mean, there were hundreds of someone pounding on the door trying to use passwords from China and Russia and all. I mean, hundreds. I couldn't believe it. So change the port to 3216 or some random thing, and then you change your outside port as well, and that makes it really hard for someone to figure out that port 4412 forwards to 3716. But you know that, and you just kind of set up your stuff. But again, VPN much easier if you can just get a firewall with VPN or put it on your corporate LAN. Everything's a lot easier that way. And just kind of remember that one hack device can take down your whole station, which is really quite scary. All right, I think I went long. I'm sorry. So just kind of summarizing what we talked about, standardizing equipment and systems across your fleet of signals, even if you have 2 or 4 stations. There's a lot of things that we engineers can do to standardize and make life easy for ourselves and others. We want to, as much as possible, use the same wiring colors and naming conventions and rack layouts. It just reduces our memory workload. We want to use technology to make our station more reliable and our lives easier. Keep things simple and don't complicate the air chain if it's not necessary. Keep those backup systems simple as well and diverse, and make sure they're tested, that they do get some exercise every once in a while, especially if they're cold. If you're keeping them powered down, power them up every once in a while, because as you all know, the generator never starts when the power goes out, but every time you walk out there, it's stupid stuff like that, but we see it all the time. Keep things clean, and then keep things safe. So I believe that is all I had. You guys have been a great crowd, and I appreciate it very much. Does anybody have any questions or anything at this point?
I think you covered it. You did. Well done.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, here's my shameless plug. I'm now independent, and if you need help with station stuff, transmitters, project management, things like that, my email address is up there. I'd love to hear from you. If not, hopefully I'll just kind of continue to see you guys at the SBE meetings here, and we'll stay connected that way. But thank you, everybody, so much. Amanda, Chris, did you have anything else for me? Sorry I went so long. I really thought this would be like 30 minutes.
No,
That's
you're
all right.
good.
Yeah, you're fine. How far will you travel?
I'm kind of planning on helping out in the whole US. Next week, I'm gonna probably go to Arkansas if they can get the equipment shipped on time. So I'll travel. Obviously for just routine station maintenance, that's probably not. I'll stick to Northern California, but project based.
I just wondered if you'd go down to Modesto if we needed you down there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an hour and a half away. That's close. Yeah.
All right, very good.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Would love to. Yeah.
Hey, Jeremy, I had a question from earlier when we talked about virtualization. I tried, and Lord knows I tried to virtualize some audio. It was actually a recorder that a streaming recorder that I wanted to virtualize. And I could not for the life of me get the audio driver, we use WheatNet, to load in the virtual machine.
Yeah.
It really seems like they wrote specific code to reject that capability into the virtualization software. Have you found that?
Their audio has been an interesting thing. We've noticed, especially in the Linux environment, that AOIP is challenging. It can be done, but you typically Livewire works better. And it depends again on the system. If you can get it to see the sound card, it will be fine. you have to kind of treat the live wire source as a sound card is what we've noticed. And but we did struggle a lot with that. I was working with Shane Tovin on a virtual basically the Gen 4 package virtualized, and Shane has his little ways of like getting stuff. I don't know how he found this way, but he got the thing. And we were trying to take live wire in from our satellite receiver, and it basically worked, but we could only get one channel to work at the time. And a lot of it had to do with the way this thing understood the sound card. So there are some issues with that. There's a new appliance that's come out. I believe it's called Broadcast Bionic, or made by them perhaps. And I think they have purposely tried to build this system to fix some of those issues. If you guys have used Kubernetes, you have to basically be a software engineer to build these Kubernetes packages. They've made that drag and drop. It's really neat. I have not had a chance to play with it except at the show, but I believe that allows you to virtualize pieces, including hardware, because that's really where it gets stuck. It's the virtual hardware. And the
Yeah.
machine goes, yeah, I see it, but then the device isn't there.
Yeah, and
So
the
you have to use
virtual,
virtual sound cards.
yeah, in the virtual environment, it was steadfast in its desire to pass the audio to the host.
Yeah,
It did not want to
go
load a
through.
sound card.
Yeah,
I mean, I tried hardware cards, I tried the WheatNet drivers, etc. And nothing other than passing audio to the host would work, which pretty much
yeah.
means I'm dead in the water with that idea.
It's got a little ways. The last success that I had was using Stereo Tool from Thimeo. I was able to pull in a live wire source, uh, see it as a source in Stereo Tool, process it, and spit it out as another live wire channel, which went to an MPX node. And that was all on one
Nice.
switch, and it worked. It was very stable. It did take a little finesse because I remember Stereo Tool was trying to see it as a Dante source, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll grab a dongle and I'll get the controller out and I'll do it that way. But played with it a little bit. I think I asked for some help from a couple other folks who have been down this road. But what I think kind of the core is that the software package you're working with has to be able to understand where it's getting it from. So, I'm talking on a microphone, but not my laptop microphone. So I had to tell Zoom, hey, I want you to use this source. And that sometimes can be really tricky, especially if the VM is like, well, I don't like the way you're doing that.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the things I'm starting to see that are being improved, but for multi-channel, like if you're trying to do HD or something, that's not fun.
Yeah. And I
For
think the folks that wrote VMware never envisioned a situation where you'd want to use virtual audio. They just didn't.
Yeah,
Well,
VMware is
bings and
weird.
bongs. Yeah, the bings and bongs we want you to hear on your own headphones
Exactly.
and nowhere else. But
Well, one of the things too is yeah, I would recommend playing with Proxmox. It's really nice. It allows you to run multiple simultaneous VMs. It is free. If you want to use it in the enterprise environment, they want you to subscribe, but you can play with it all day long. And it kind of boots up like an OS, and then you can load individual OSs and individual all kinds. And we had Linux and Windows and all kinds of stuff running simultaneously on one machine. And the great part is you can actually allow or disallow communication between the VMs. So you can actually pass sound from one VM to another or not. And I've had the same issue with VMware where sometimes it couldn't even get the camera to work properly. But on Proxmox, it's much more flexible. There's a learning curve. You kind of have to read through the documentation and poke around with it. But once you get it up, and let's say, hey, I'm gonna bring in WheatNet on this sound card, and on the VM, I'm gonna tell it, I want you to look only here for this is where I'm gonna encode my audio from. This seemed like we were very successful, and using Proxmox is where I was able to get Stereo Tool to see Livewire and to spit out Livewire and function. And we had a virtual remote control and a few other things running on the same machine in different instances. And we were running it on a Nook, one of those little Intel Nooks. I wouldn't put that at a broadcast site. It's got one wall wart plug-in and you're using dongles for NICs, but it's fun to play with and it's cheap. So
yeah, thanks.
Of course. Yeah. Great question though. Yeah. Virtualization has, it's a headache and you gotta have some time to goof off with it. But once you get it to work, it's like, oh, that's actually really neat. I can't believe this actually works.
Well, and I love being able to build the ISOs and just have them sitting, waiting, ready
Yeah.
to go.
Yeah. Once you get it fixed and working, copy that sucker off and save it and save it, and then you just load it. And it's nice to be able to just duplicate something so fast. And besides maybe changing some IP addresses or something, you're good to go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. A great question.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Question
Hey
about
guys, hey guys, hey Jeremy from Jack up on the mountain here east of Reading. Can you copy?
Yeah, loud and clear, man.
Oh, okay, good. Amanda, do you want a quick little tour from a mountaintop east of Reading here, real quick?
Sure.
Okay, I just thought you guys might. Oh, let me do that. Might enjoy seeing this real quick. So we're up here east of Reading by about 50 miles. There's Mount Lassen. Off in the distance there, we're up here amongst a large amount of windmills that kind of at the moment those are calmed down, but some of the others are blowing. And I don't know if I go in the building if you're still going to be able to get my signal here. But we're in between Mount Lassen off in the distance, and Mount Shasta is off here. I think maybe you can see it above the trees there. Those trees are immediately in the way, but we're in between a couple of volcanoes, and here's the tower site that we're working at. We just replaced an ancient V10 Nautel transmitter here that had given up the ghost completely. And I think if I walk inside, you'll lose my signal, but I'll try to post some pictures later. But anyway, just thought I'd say hey to you guys from up here east of Redding, California, up in the northern California mountains. So good to see everybody. Thanks for the time here, Amanda.
Good to see you, Jack. Anybody else have any questions for Barry?
I guess, is he hearing us?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Question about Starlink. How have you heard of problems with it? I talked to one engineer here in Colorado and he was using it for a backup, and he said that there was some, not just dropouts, but there was also some audio quality issues. Have you heard of that problem?
We probably haven't done as much testing as needed for continuous audio delivery. But when I tested it, I basically put a very high bandwidth stream on, and I used a program called Ping Plotter to watch how the network behaved. And I was able to stream for a few weeks, and I didn't get any alarms on my test jig that said I dropped audio. It is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's KA band or maybe a mix of KU, KA. So it is weather, it's affected by weather, heavy rain, thick clouds, snow. It's going to be a problem. And I've heard concerns from engineers about the ability for it to survive ice falls, especially at tower sites. I would say, yeah, it's probably going to get destroyed. It's got a plastic little cover on it. But in my testing, it was very reliable. I first tested it at EMF's headquarters in Rockland, California, and I was getting good throughput. And then I took it to a remote site where I barely had cell service. And I said, hey, I'm going to put it up here. I'm going to run audio just from a laptop and just see what it does. And I let it cook for a long time. And honestly, my speed tests and everything at the remote site were far better because I think Starlink kind of favors distant or maybe more rural areas. I'm not sure, but I was getting 200 megabit downlink up there. And in Rockland, where we got fiber everywhere, I was getting 25. So all I can say is what I tested, it was good. However, there are scheduled holes in the system. And what I've heard from avid users is somewhere a couple times a day, you'll usually have a 15-second gap. Now, if you're using a ton of buffering and forward error correction, you might be able to survive that, but that's, a 30-second outage every day. I'm not so sure my GM's going to be super happy about that, but if that's all you got, that's all you got.
We use Viasat at a couple of our locations and it works great.
Mhm.
It's even a great backup to our high capacity STL. And I actually have it set up, in fact, where I'm at right now, where I can either get to the local PC by way of the Viasat or the STL. And it saved my bacon a
Oh,
number of
yeah.
times, although there's quite a bit of latency when you're trying to use VNC, but for streaming, I mean, we've got a barracks and it just runs like a hose
Wow.
and there's no scheduled outages.
And
Yeah,
for $10 a month, you get a static with it too.
that's nice. Yeah. If Starlink can get a couple of those things, get the corporate, excuse me, the corporate billing, static IPs, they've got a really good platform there. And there's, like I said, there's some disadvantages for full-time main audio delivery, but those may be worked out as more birds get launched and they kind of fill those gaps. But again, my testing was, I was running I want to say it was about a 512K audio stream. So about as linear as you can be without linear. And it was very reliable. I was surprised. I honestly thought I was going to drop out way more often, but it worked well. Viasat's a great option too. Even HughesNet, even for monitor and control, uh, for $100 a month or whatever, it works surprisingly good to be able to get into your remote control and talk to your rack. And I think they offer some business level static IPs and things like that too. Um, as I said, anything's better than nothing, especially when you're off the air. If you can get some audio, I mean, geez, plug a phone in, it doesn't matter, get something. But if you got anything up there, a barracks box, if even minimal internet will usually make audio work. Thankfully, if we're dealing with TV, that's a whole nother headache trying to get video somewhere.
One last question. Is there a password manager that you recommend?
Oh, there's a couple good ones. RoboForm is good. It's relatively inexpensive. It's about $20 a year. Um, and LastPass and OnePass are also very highly recommended, a little more expensive. They generally charge per user, especially if you have one of those kind of plans where you're doing it for a business. But I've used RoboForm for many years, and it's nice because you can install it on every device you have, your phone, iPad, laptop, and it attaches as you can run it as an application and a browser plugin. So when you log into a site and you type in a password, it'll say, hey, do you want me to remember this? And it can even be an IP address. It'll say you want 10.2 whatever to remember this password. Yes. The next time you go there, it'll just say, hey, do you want me to log in for you? And you click yes, and it fills in and you're good. And if you use those, I highly recommend using 2-level or second-level authentication. Make sure someone can't guess your password, because once you lose that, then you're out. But if you use, texting or something like Authy or Google Authenticator as a second-level password, uh, at least to get logged in, that's super helpful. And I believe all of them, OnePass, LastPass, DashPass, RoboForm, any of the big ones will allow for the second level authentication. If you're going to be using it on tower sites where you don't have good, reliable internet or cell service, where you might not be able to get a text, definitely check out Google Authenticator or Authy, Authy. They are offline authentication codes, so it's all time based. And so if it says, hey, I need your authentication code, you can completely be on SOS mode on your phone and it still works. So that's a good way just to have it in your back pocket.
Thank you.
Of course.
Anybody else? Thanks so much, Jeremy. That was really good. I'll put this on YouTube probably this weekend.
Okay.
And so, if, like, Jack wants to actually listen in on what all he missed, he can.
He
Thank
probably
you.
knows half this stuff anyway, but thanks guys. I appreciate it. All right. Well, you guys have a wonderful rest of your week and take care. I'll talk to you soon.